And by that, I mean you got all the big players across the Old Testament and the New Testament. Most importantly, Abraham, Noah, Moses, Jesus, John, other disciples that we care less about. But unlike the Bible, the Qur'an is non-linear. The Bible that we know today tries to follow, to a certain extent, a kind of timeline, so that it tells to a degree a chronological story. But in the Qur'an, so you know how the Qur'an is basically a continuation of the Bible. What, Elianne? I thought the Qur'an was its own thing. Okay, both of these statements are somewhat correct. They're each half true because the Qur'an is kind of a continuation of the Bible, but it is also its own thing. And a lot of my English-speaking audience has been trying to read the Qur'an and then coming to the Discord being like, Elianne, what in the world is this and how do I read it? Let's get into some of the similarities and differences between the Bible and the Qur'an, and we'll see whose God is truly the strongest. Just kidding, they're the same God, and that's our first similarity. There's one God, and it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Noah, and Jacob, and Moses. The best way that I could describe the Qur'an to an English-speaking person who is familiar with the Bible is as a linguistic chaos of archetypal Judeo-Christian lore. And by that, I mean you got all the big players across the Old Testament and the New Testament. Most importantly, Abraham, Noah, Moses, Jesus, John, other disciples that we care less about. But unlike the Bible, the Qur'an is non-linear. The Bible that we know today tries to follow, to a certain extent, a kind of timeline, so that it tells to a degree a chronological story. But in the Qur'an, plot and historical accuracy or detail are secondary to the symbolism and the moral lessons that the Qur'an is trying to put forth. So for example, in the Bible, we got the one story about the creation of man. Sometimes these get extrapolated into 2 or 3 from other vague parts of the biblical text, but ultimately there's the one standard story on the creation of Adam and Eve. In the Qur'an, the story is told several times throughout the book. It's interwoven into the text, like other stories. So you'll find it in different chapters, and every time you find it, it's a little bit different. In one chapter, for example, it's the standard God creates man out of dirt and breathes life into him. But in another story, he doesn't breathe life. He just says, be, and Adam is. And then in another story, when God is getting ready to create a king or lord or viceroy on earth, the angels stage a protest. Like, are you seriously about to create something that might possibly destroy everything you've done so far? We've been here, we've been taking orders, we've been working with you. But alas, there was no union to protect these angels, and CEO Allah did not care. He created us and he let it be known that we were his absolute favorites. He made the protesting angels bow down to Adam. And in part, that is the purpose of the repetition of this story, to emphasize just how much love Allah or God has for us. The implicit theme is that Allah is the proudest mama. She just wants to show off her baby. Allah is so in love with mankind that the angels are jealous. If we were just going to take the spiritual lesson here, that we were created out of obsessive motherly love. So Jesus as a kid was kind of an asshole. Not according to the Bible, of course, because they skip all those years. The Bible has his birth, the flight to Egypt, and his low-key bar mitzvah in the book of Luke that I forgot to mention last time. Let me be clear though, this is no hate to the Bible, because I love the Bible and all religious books, if for nothing else but for what they teach us about culture. But let's talk about Jesus as a kid and where we get those stories. Because we talked a little bit about the stories we find in the Qur'an, and we connected them to the infancy gospel of Thomas. But let's go over the infancy gospel of Thomas, because when I tell you that this kid was a menace, it's an understatement. Because baby Jesus is probably the originator of the phrase, do you know who you're dealing with? So this gospel covers the years between the ages of 5 and 12, and it actually ends at the part that appears in Luke where Jesus is at the temple. But the major theme is that everybody wants Joseph to discipline baby Jesus, because everything baby Jesus says miraculously comes to pass. And being this tyrannical type drunk-on-powered trickster child, baby Jesus is mostly going around telling people to drop dead. Okay, so for example, after he brings the birds to life and stuff, the son of a priest comes and tries to destroy the little pools that Jesus was making. So Jesus gets pissed and he says, "Your fruit will have no root. Your shoot will be withered like a scorched branch in a violent wind." And the child drops dead. In another one, he's just walking with his dad, minding his own business, when someone runs by and hits him on the shoulder. So Jesus turns around and goes, "Cursed be you because of your leader." And the guy... Now people start to notice that stuff is going on. So they come up to Joseph like, "Where is this child from that his word becomes deed? Joseph, wherever you got this kid from, you can't sit with us. Well, you can't live with us in this village. If you want to stay, you need to teach him to use this power for blessing and not cursing, because our children are being taken from us." And poor old Joseph, who's trying to just read his morning paper, he looks at his son and he's like, "Baby Jesus, why are you saying these things? People are suffering and now they hate us." But baby Jesus, just super chill with the power of the Lord, zero fucks given, is like, "Oh, please, old man, since you know how to say things that are so wise, then you aren't ignorant of these people's intentions. They're saying this stuff about a 5-year-old. So you know what? Let them have their punishment." And in that moment, everybody who had tattletale went blind. This one didn't go over well with Joseph, though. Took baby Jesus away kicking and screaming by the ear. Now there's more, but we're already 2.5 minutes in. There's the part where he makes his teacher cry and basically explains the alphabet to him. The time where he unalives the kid and then brings him back to life to prove how righteous he is. And then in the very end, he brings everybody back to life. But really all while saying basically, "Don't mess with me." The way the gospel puts it is, all who had fallen under his curse were saved. And from then on, no one dared to provoke him. So we all know about Moses, right? His mom sent him in a basket down a river to hide him from Pharaoh, ends up in the Pharaoh's palace, grows up as his son, accidentally unalives an Egyptian soldier, and eventually leads his people away from Egyptian tyranny into the promised land. But do we know about Khidr? Or as the Qur'an describes him, God's servant, who comes to teach Moses a couple of fun lessons. Okay, let's get into it. This is a story from the Qur'an. And let me preface this by saying that Moses is a very important figure in the Qur'an. He's like the OG prophet. I think he's the most mentioned individual in the entire book. So Moses' Arabic name is Musa. And Musa meets Khidr after arriving at the meeting of the two waters. And I'll tell you why I think that's important later. This is in the Qur'an's 18th chapter, Surah Al-Kahf, or the cave. So Moses is walking along on his journey. He's actually going back to the place of the waters because his assistant dropped his fish. And the Qur'an says, "There they found our servant, to whom we granted mercy and whom we gave of our knowledge." And Moses is like, "Hey, could I follow you and maybe you could teach me some of your righteous ways?" And Khidr is like, I don't think you have the patience for it. I mean, let's face it, how can you be patient with things that are so far outside your realm of understanding? And Moses is like, "Listen, God willing, you will find me patient and obedient to your orders." And Khidr is like, "All right, but listen, you don't ask me any question. I'll explain everything when it's time." So they set off on their journey, and the first place they arrive is at a little boat. And just as they climb the boat, Khidr makes a hole in it. And Moses is like, "What are you doing? Why are you trying to drown these people?" And Khidr is like, "Moses, what do we say about patience?" And Moses is like, okay, sorry, I forgot. And they continue when they see a young man on their path. And Khidr unalives him. And once again, Moses is like, "You just unalived an innocent person. He hasn't hurt a soul." And Khidr is like, "Moses, I told you didn't have the patience." Okay, sorry. If I ask you anything else, just tell me to go. Don't keep me in your company. And they continue until they arrive at a little town. And they ask the people of the town for food, but the people refuse. And they find a wall in the town about to collapse. So Khidr decides to repair it. And at this point, Moses is done. "What are you doing, man? You could have at least asked for a fee for this." "Oh no, the sun is going." So Khidr is like, "Listen, man, this is where you and I part ways. And when I explain all the things that you didn't have the patience for. I sabotaged the boat to keep it from being stolen by the tyrant king who's going around taking boats by force. I unalived the boy because he was going to bring his parents, who are righteous people, to shame. And our Lord will give them someone more virtuous in his place. Amma al-jidar, as for the wall, there's a treasure under it that belongs to orphans, and their father was a righteous man. We fixed that wall because the Lord would want them to have their reward." Okay, that took longer than I thought it would. All this to say, doesn't it sound like Moses is going through a kind of personal alchemy or individuation process?